The first thing officers noticed wasn't the body. It was the silence. Deep inside a wooded patch in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, a place joggers tend to avoid once autumn strips the trees bare, a state trooper's flashlight cut across the ground like a blade. The air was still, the forest empty, and the only sound was the quiet crunch of dead leaves under boots. This wasn't a park or a recreational trail. It was a neglected edge of the city, a strip of land that acted as a dense, natural screen behind a residential area. It wasn't the kind of place where people simply stumble upon tragedy. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. But on the morning of October 27th, 2025, that's exactly what happened. The call had come in just after sunrise. Someone had reported what looked like a person down in a wooded area behind a residential stretch. By the time investigators from the Pawtucket Police Department arrived, they already suspected this wouldn't be a natural death. And within minutes, that suspicion hardened into certainty. A young woman lay on the ground, partially concealed by branches and debris. The scene looked wrong, too staged, too quiet. It lacked the visual trauma of an outdoor struggle or the disarray of an accidental death. A perimeter was immediately secured, and the multi-agency investigation began to form, pulling in detectives from the Central Falls Police Department and the Rhode Island office of the Attorney General. The complex nature of the scene demanded an immediate, collaborative response. That woman was 24-year-old Erica Bader of Central Falls, Rhode Island. And from the very beginning, investigators understood one thing: Erica did not die here. The team from the Office of the State Medical Examiner and forensic analysts examined the immediate vicinity. Their findings were critical, establishing the foundational fact of the entire case. No blood pattern consistent with on-site trauma. No evidence of a struggle scarring the forest floor. No indicators of an accident or self-inflicted harm. Her body had been transported. This detail changed everything. The discovery became classified immediately as a body dump, an act that almost always points to criminal involvement, requiring calculated effort and intent to conceal. Pawtucket was the discovery site, but the true crime scene, the location of death, was elsewhere. This simple forensic truth transformed the search. Instead of looking for a lone killer acting locally, detectives were now searching for an unknown primary location, a vehicle, and likely multiple individuals involved in moving the victim and disposing of the evidence. But where had she come from? Who was she last seen with? And why was her body left here, in a shallow, obscure patch of woods that offered a false sense of finality? As investigators began to trace her final known movements, the trail led directly to Central Street, a place that would soon become the epicenter of one of Rhode Island's most disturbing multi-suspect cases in recent history. To understand the story before the public ever learned her name, you have to understand the young woman at the center of it. Erica wasn't someone who regularly made the news. She wasn't wealthy, powerful, or connected to any headline-making world. She was simply a 24-year-old trying to navigate a hard life in a harder world. Court records and initial statements paint the picture of a young woman who had struggled, moved around, and recently found herself staying in a residence on Central Street in Central Falls, Rhode Island, a cramped house shared with several other adults. While the precise nature of her relationships with the inhabitants of that house remained guarded by investigators, what was known was chilling. The people inside that residence were not just roommates or acquaintances. They would eventually become 8 criminal defendants, all tied, by varying degrees, to Erica's mysterious death and the disturbing discovery that followed. And crucially, as confirmed by her family and later substantiated by police, Erica Bader was pregnant when she was killed. This tragic detail added another layer of gravity to the crime, signaling a brutality that shocked the community and intensified the police investigation. But on that morning in the woods, none of that was known yet. All investigators had was a young woman, a suspicious scene, and a growing list of questions about the hours before she was placed in the cold soil of Pawtucket. Just 2 days after Erica's body was discovered, investigators moved in on the home where she had been staying in Central Falls. It was a multi-unit building, cramped and worn. The type of place that looks quiet from the street, but holds secrets behind every peeling layer of paint. Police entered the residence expecting to find clues related to a homicide. What they found instead was a nightmare of another kind entirely, exposing the chaotic, desperate environment Erica had endured in her final days. Inside were dozens of cats and dogs, many malnourished, dehydrated, and living in conditions described by reporters as filthy and severely neglected. The scene was overwhelming, a confirmed hoarding environment that necessitated the immediate involvement of animal control and the Department of Environmental Management. More than 40 animals were removed from the property. Many rooms lacked food and clean water. Conditions included cages stacked, feces covering the floor, dogs tied to furniture, and cats hiding in piles of debris. It wasn't just an unhealthy environment. It was a dangerous crisis level one. And this was the same environment where Erica had been living, the same place where police suspected the crime had been committed. But the animals weren't the main reason detectives were there. They were looking for people who might know what happened inside the walls where Erica spent her final moments. On October 29, 2025, just 2 days after Erica's body was located, the first round of arrests began. 6 individuals connected to the Central Street residence were initially charged. Critically, these initial charges were not for murder, but for something that hinted at a deeper, organized effort to conceal the truth: failure to report a death and conspiracy. Those arrested included 34-year-old Brittany Turpinning, identified in court documents as one of Erica's roommates. Turpinning and others faced charges that directly implied complicity and silence. A charge of failure to report a death is a powerful legal statement. It means authorities believe multiple people witnessed or discovered a death, knew it happened, and collectively chose not to contact authorities. That alone confirmed that the people inside the house were aware of Erica's condition at some point and stayed silent as her body was moved. But the evidence investigators would uncover next would take this case far beyond simple failure to report. The quiet, collaborative silence of the initial 6 arrestees had given investigators a critical window to collect evidence, conduct interviews, and piece together the final, horrifying moments of Erica Bader's life. As the days passed, pressure on the investigation grew. Rumors, fueled by statements from Erica's family, circulated in the community that she had been held against her while inside the Central Street house and harmed before she ever reached the Pawtucket Woods. Still, at this stage, those remained claims, not confirmed law enforcement facts. And then, on November 25, 2025, the real bombshell hit. Because the moment investigators returned to Central Street with a new set of warrants, the case transformed completely. From a suspicious death with 6 silent bystanders, into a full-scale homicide investigation with 8 criminal defendants, several facing the most serious charges the state can file: murder and kidnapping. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. Who were the people inside that house, and what were they hiding? Because once detectives stepped off that wooded trail and walked through the doors of 268 Central Street, they realized something instantly. This wasn't just a place where Erica lived. It was a place where something had gone very, very wrong. Central Falls is one of those tightly packed New England cities where homes sit close, neighbors know each other, and most houses blend into the quiet wear and tear of old mill towns. But investigators noted almost immediately that this specific residence stood out, and not in a good way. Paint peeling, windows blocked, trash stacked near the porch. Neighbors later told reporters they always knew the house wasn't right, but nobody could have predicted what officers were about to walk into. Earlier, police had confirmed that the body recovered in Pawtucket belonged to 24-year-old Erica Bader. That alone was a shock. But the discovery of her body didn't answer the biggest question. Why did she end up there? To understand the timeline, detectives needed to retrace Erica's last known movements. Every lead brought them back to one location: the house on Central Street, the place where Erica had been staying before she disappeared. Detectives didn't know what they were walking into. They expected a possible scene related to a suspicious death. What they found instead became a subplot that exploded into its own crisis. The first thing that hit them was the smell: thick, sour, unmistakably tied to animal waste and severe neglect. Rooms were cluttered wall to wall. Half-eaten food containers, broken furniture, and clothing piles created makeshift paths through the home. It was a hoarding environment so extreme that officers had to maneuver sideways to get through some of the rooms. And then they saw the animals. Not one, not a few. More than 40 cats and dogs were discovered living inside that small space. Many were malnourished, trembling, or dehydrated. Some were hiding under furniture. Others were trying to approach officers as if begging for help. There were no visible food bowls, no clean water sources. The Boston Globe later described the conditions inside as dangerous and unsanitary, a place unfit for humans or animals. This wasn't just a messy house. It was a crisis scene. As officers continued deeper inside, they found something else. Something that shifted the entire direction of the investigation. Evidence that Erica had been there recently, her belongings, personal items, and indications she never left that house on her own. 2 days after Erica's body was found, the investigation swept up 6 people connected to the residence. Brittany Turpinning, 34, Erica's roommate, facing a domestic assault felony charge. 5 others, all charged with failure to report a death. But here's the detail that caught the public off guard. None of them were charged with murder at that time. Not one. Reporters initially thought this might be a case where someone died during a medical emergency, and people panicked instead of calling 911. After all, the early charge, failure to report a death, often appears in cases where individuals discover someone deceased and try to hide it out of fear rather than malice. But that theory didn't last long, because behind the scenes, investigators were quickly piecing together evidence that suggested something much darker had happened inside that house. While police continued digging through every corner of the property, members of Erica's family were desperately trying to understand what happened. And the moment they spoke publicly, the tone surrounding the case changed. They told local news outlets they believed Erica was pregnant. They believed she had been held against her will inside the home. They believed she had been assaulted, raped, and ultimately killed before her body was dumped in the woods. And they believed the people inside that house were strangers, not friends. Her stepmother spoke with heartbreaking clarity. They killed her and the baby. Now, to be clear, investigators have not released autopsy details. They have not confirmed pregnancy or sexual assault. Those claims remain allegations from the family, not verified evidence. But what the family said lit a fire under public attention. A suspicious death case had now become a possible kidnapping, a possible murder, and, if the family was correct, possibly the killing of an unborn child. The community began calling for answers. Reporters were stationed outside the Central Street house, and police continued working quietly but aggressively behind the scenes. Because in the hours after those initial arrests, investigators were already uncovering new information. Evidence that the early charges barely scratched the surface. Something terrible had happened to Erica, and it wasn't an accident. It wasn't a panic. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was intentional. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. As detectives collected statements and cross-checked timelines, one thing became increasingly clear. More than 6 people were involved. This wasn't a situation where a single person harmed Erica and others tried to cover it. This wasn't a simple case of people failing to call for help. This was organized, coordinated, and, based on the evidence they were uncovering, planned. Why was Erica living there? Who brought her into the house? What happened in the hours leading up to her death? Those questions didn't yet have answers. But the evidence pointed detectives to 2 terrifying conclusions. Erica did not die in the woods. She likely died inside that Central Street residence. And once detectives understood that, the case turned from a suspicious death to a homicide investigation. While crime scene investigators processed the house, other detectives began pulling the personal histories of everyone who lived there. And what they found sent the case spiraling into an even darker direction. Several individuals inside that home had violent criminal backgrounds. Others had histories of substance abuse, past arrests, or complaints involving domestic violence. This wasn't a stable household. It wasn't a safe living environment. It wasn't a place where a vulnerable 24-year-old should have been living, especially not if she was pregnant, as the family believed. Detectives now suspected that Erica was surrounded by danger from the moment she stepped inside that house. But they still didn't know the full scope. They didn't yet have the full picture. That changed in late November, because less than a month after Erica's body was found, investigators made an announcement so shocking it made national news. 8 people were being charged. 5 with murder, kidnapping, and conspiracy. 5, not 1, not 2. 5 separate individuals accused of participating in Erica's killing. But who were they? And what evidence finally allowed detectives to upgrade the charges from failure to report a death to first-degree murder? The answers to those questions would expose the darkest side of this case and force the public to confront the terrifying possibility that Erica was targeted, isolated, and brutalized by a group of people acting together. The 6 individuals initially arrested for failure to report a death had provided detectives with a starting point. That charge was a tool, a way to hold them, separate them, and force the conspirators to crack. But the true evidence, the evidence that proved this was not a panic or an accident, but a premeditated crime, was still being built in the background. The question detectives now faced was simple but terrifying. What truly transpired inside the walls of the house on Central Street that forced multiple adults to conspire to move a body under the cover of darkness? Investigators from the Central Falls and Pawtucket police departments, alongside the Attorney General's office, began to cross-reference every known statement with every recovered piece of evidence. The crime scene was no longer the woods in Pawtucket, but the house on Central Street. As they processed Erica's final known residence, the focus shifted from just where she died to who was present and what their roles were in the alleged cover-up. The initial group of arrestees included Brittany Turpinning, Erica's roommate. But as the investigation widened, the suspects' circle grew. Failure to report a death implied silence. But the subsequent charge of conspiracy suggested something far more organized. The police now believed they were looking at a coordinated plot involving not just a few roommates, but a wider network of 8 people, all connected by their knowledge of the crime and their alleged agreement to hide it. For weeks, the public knew only the names of the initial 6 charged with lesser crimes. The murder investigation was ongoing, fueled by the forensic evidence that proved Erica was killed elsewhere and the family's confirmed claim that she was pregnant at the time of her death. This detail, confirmed by law enforcement, added intense pressure to the case. It solidified the severity of the crime and ensured the investigation would not rest until every person involved was identified and held accountable. The silence from the Central Street house was maintained only briefly. In the pressure cooker of police interviews and the accumulation of forensic evidence, the initial story of panic silence began to fall apart. Detectives were able to trace the final hours, leading them to believe that the body was moved from the Central Falls residence and dumped in the Pawtucket woods in an attempt to mislead police. Then, in late November 2025, the moment the public and Erica's family had been waiting for finally arrived. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. On November 25, 2025, the Rhode Island Attorney General's office made a dramatic announcement. The case had exploded. The charges against the initial group were superseded, and 2 new individuals were added to the list of defendants. The number of suspects now stood at 8, and the charges were no longer about failing to make a phone call. They were about homicide. The 8 defendants were divided into 2 groups, revealing the hierarchy of culpability investigators now alleged. Group 1, charged with murder, kidnapping, and conspiracy. Andrew Cornell, 28. Joshua Brunel, 35. Elizabeth Durand, 41. Stephanie Bletzer, 37. Brittany Turpinning, 34. Group 2, charged with kidnapping, conspiracy, and failure to report a death. Christopher Kordaluski, 22. Joan Miller, 26. Cheryl Blakely, 36. The scope of the alleged crime was now clear. 5 individuals were directly accused of participating in the killing. 8 individuals were accused of being involved in the kidnapping and conspiracy surrounding the death of Erica Bader. This was not a solo crime gone wrong. This was an alleged group action, organized and executed by 5 killers and 3 accomplices, all connected to the house on Central Street. The inclusion of kidnapping was particularly disturbing. It confirmed the family's earlier fears, suggesting Erica was held against her while inside the house before her death. This wasn't a spontaneous argument. It was an alleged confinement leading directly to murder. With the new charges, the legal fight began. All 8 suspects were being held without bail, none having entered a plea. The court documents, now sealed and complex, would eventually reveal the motive and the exact mechanism of death. But the structure of the crime was now in the public record. The 8 individuals who were supposed to be roommates, neighbors, or acquaintances of Erica Bader were now alleged participants in her murder and the systematic attempt to cover it up. The woods didn't kill her. They were simply the final, quiet resting place chosen by the people who allegedly did. The full truth of why this conspiracy formed, what the motive was for the kidnapping, and the full details of Erica Bader's final, terrifying moments inside the house on Central Street. The next phase of the case would move into the courtroom. And when the sealed court documents finally emerge, they will reveal the horrifying specifics of the conspiracy, the evidence used to charge these 8 people, and the disturbing details of what led to the death of 24-year-old Erica Bader and her unborn child. What did those court documents reveal about the motive? And what was the horrifying timeline that led to the death of Erica Bader? The moment the final charges were filed on November 25, 2025, the case against the 8 individuals connected to the Central Street house moved from the detective's file to the courtroom. This was no longer an inquiry. It was a prosecution, alleging a wide-ranging conspiracy that led to the murder of Erica Bader and her unborn child. The shift in charges was the breaking point. The initial silence and the lesser charge of failure to report a death were replaced by the terrifying severity of murder, kidnapping, and conspiracy. Investigators, by dividing the suspects into 2 groups, revealed the extent of the alleged involvement. The facts confirmed that the state believed the crime was collective, with defined roles. 5 individuals were charged with the most serious crimes, indicating the state believed they were directly responsible for Erica's death and confinement. Andrew Cornell, Joshua Brunel, Elizabeth Durand, Stephanie Bletzer, and Brittany Turpinning. 3 individuals faced charges for their alleged roles in the confinement and the subsequent cover-up: Christopher Kordaluski, Joan Miller, and Cheryl Blakely. Their charges of kidnapping, conspiracy, and failure to report a death solidified the state's belief that while they may not have committed the homicide, they were instrumental in the circumstances leading to it and the attempt to dispose of the body. The inclusion of kidnapping as a charge for all 8 defendants was key. It countered any argument of an accidental death or spontaneous violence. It alleged that Erica Bader was held against her while inside the Central Street residence, a period of confinement that preceded and led directly to her murder. In the days following the dramatic announcement, all 8 defendants were brought before a judge for arraignment. The courtrooms were packed with media and members of Erica Bader's family, who finally heard the formal accusations laid bare. The procedural facts of the arrests solidified the investigation's success. All 8 suspects were ordered to be held without bail. This decision, reflecting the seriousness of the charges and the flight risk associated with a multi-defendant conspiracy, signaled the gravity with which the Attorney General's office viewed the case. As of late November 2025, none of the 8 defendants had entered a formal plea to the charges. This is a common tactic in complex cases, giving defense attorneys time to review the massive amounts of discovery, including forensic reports, digital evidence, and witness statements that supported the murder and conspiracy allegations. The court process now centered on the sealed evidence gathered during the raids on the Central Street home and the subsequent interviews. That evidence, not yet public, was what convinced the grand jury to approve the most severe charges possible. The central fact confirmed by both her family and investigators, that Erica Bader was pregnant when she was killed, lent a profound tragedy to the conspiracy charges. The alleged actions of the 8 defendants resulted in the deaths of 2 lives. The case, while legally complex due to the sheer number of defendants and the varying degrees of charges, was fundamentally about the accountability of a collective silence. The individuals who shared a home with Erica Bader are now alleged to have been part of a deliberate plot that ended her life and then attempted to conceal the evidence by dumping her body in the Pawtucket woods. The investigation was over. The charges were filed. The legal process was now ready to begin. Erica Bader did not get to live the future she deserved. She was 24, expecting a child, and, according to the state's allegations, was trapped and murdered by a group of people she lived alongside. But her name would not fade into the silent woods where she was found. The case of the 8 co-defendants of Central Falls would now proceed to trial, ensuring that the details of the horrifying conspiracy and the memory of Erica Bader would remain in the public light until justice was delivered. And as always, you've been watching True Crime Story Vault, where every story is told with facts, empathy, and respect for those who can no longer speak for themselves. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button and comment your thoughts below. Until next time, remember, the truth is never buried.